Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Redford, and this is the follow-up. Coming up on tonight's show, a new perspective on the presidential impeachment inquiry and a look at some new polls that reflects how we all feel about it. Plus, what's taking the UAW and GM so long to settle this strike now in its 30th day, and what's the impact of this prolonged work stoppage? University of Michigan Flint professor Chris Douglas is here to break it all down for us tonight. And that's not all. Lori Ziolkowski from Families Against Narcotics is also here with an update on the opioid crisis and what's being done to save lives. But first, we have viewer reaction from last week's show on Twitter. Crystal McMorris writes, "Your GOP talking point doesn't quite check out. Watchdog experts debunk Trump claim whistleblower rules changed after the complaint." And you're right, Crystal, it didn't change, but maybe it should, because many wonder how a whistleblower can accuse the president or anyone else, for that matter, of wrongdoing without firsthand knowledge and then do it anonymously. We also got this comment on our follow-up hotline related to the impeachment inquiry of President Trump.
If they don't do anything to Trump, we're asking another country to meddle in our elections. It's going to be open season on other countries to do the same thing. Bye-bye.
And we also got this call from a viewer with a question about road funding.
I'm in Whittemore, Michigan. I would like to know, our governor mixed all kinds of tax money for fixing the roads. They're terrible. What happened to the original money, and why can't they get money now to fix the roads? Thank you.
Well, that is a great question. We'll have that answer for you next week on the show when the head of the Saginaw County Road Commission will be on the follow-up to answer all your questions, so stay tuned. And we'd like to hear from more of you to help drive the conversation here in the follow-up. You can do that in a variety of ways via social media on Facebook and Twitter. You can also dial into our follow-up hotline as those viewers did. And if you'd like to see any of our past shows, just log on to deltabroadcasting.org. As I said, Chris Douglas, the first-time guest to the follow-up. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here this evening.
Yeah, U of M Flint economics professor. So let's talk about the impeachment inquiry, kind of the update. You're kind of cynical about that, right? Nothing new. It seems like the opposition is trying to build a case against him in one form or another since he's gotten in office, right?
Yeah, it's hard to know how seriously to take this latest round of impeachment talk, since really the talk began the second that he was elected, even before he took office. And it seems like the goalposts have shifted continuously in terms of what they could impeach him over. It was obstruction of justice, then the Russia stuff. Everyone thought the Mueller investigation would give some real red meat for impeachment. That didn't happen. The Comey testimony at Congress was a letdown. The Mueller testimony was a big letdown. So now we have the Ukrainian thing. Maybe the Ukrainian thing's different. It's hard to know. But it just kind of feels like the boy that cried wolf at this point.
Yeah,
and that here we got this 3-year saga going on. How seriously should we take this latest round?
Yeah, and it's getting in the way of doing the business of government. And I think people are a little bit tired of it. Let's look at a couple polls, and love to get your reaction. Now, let's go up to poll number 1, Bob, and take a look at that. In terms of how we're all feeling about it, impeachment inquiry into President Trump among Americans now and compared to 2 weeks ago. So it really hasn't changed much in the last 2 weeks, but obviously by and large the majority is that they support an inquiry of some sort. Let's move on to the next one. Got a couple of them here. This is based along party lines. Any surprises there?
No, it just shows that impeachment is turning into a popularity contest about the president. If you like the president, you don't support the impeachment. If you dislike the president, you do support impeachment, according to the polls. So that's not really what the founders intended impeachment to be.
No, and you look at the independents here, they disapprove, so they're sort of aligned with the Republicans a little bit on there, kind of on the fence, huh?
Yeah, that's interesting. Perhaps the independents have some impeachment fatigue, too.
Let's go to the next one, Bob. Should the Trump administration cooperate with the impeachment inquiry among Americans? They think the president should, full disclosure, he should participate, 63%, and should not, 37%. And then the last one, impeachment inquiry is it a political distraction? Is it serious, not critical? A critical matter, and of course, it looks like it is along party lines again. So no surprises there. I think part of this whole issue, too, whether or not the current inquiry is warranted or not on the Ukraine phone call. It's the process in general. It seems a little flawed because with an impeachment inquiry, there's no set of rules. You can kind of make it up as long as you go. And what's happening, I think, this week is you've got sort of the Democratic-led House Intelligence Committee that are interviewing folks, behind closed doors. It doesn't seem as transparent, too, right?
Yeah, I think what's unusual, too, about this impeachment inquiry is that we're talking impeachment before the investigation has even happened. If you think back to Watergate, even if you think back to the Clinton impeachment, there was always an investigation, and then the results of the investigation made people think that impeachment was warranted. Because the Clinton impeachment stemmed from the Whitewater investigation, where during the course of the investigation, the Monica Lewinsky thing came to light, and then the perjury, obstruction of justice, and then people started talking impeachment. What's unique about Trump is people start talking about impeachment first, and then it's kind of, better start the investigation to figure out if we can make this happen or not.
Exactly. And the only other issue is, tonight there's going to be a Democratic debate. It's the third one. I think there's going to be 12 players in this, including Biden, of course. The first couple of debates, I think they focused on sort of policy and some sort of attack Biden, who was the front runner. However, with this impeachment inquiry, do you sense that may more be the focus, you think?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I tend to think no, just because you have to get out of the primary to get to the general election. And everyone on stage agrees that the president should be impeached. So you're not going to really differentiate yourself in the debate if you support impeachment when the other 11 candidates do as well, which is why debate number 2, they really started attacking Biden and in turn Obama, because they had to knock him down because he was such a clear front runner that if you knock Biden down, well, now it's kind of game on for everyone else. Biden has lost a lot of steam since debate number 2, so it'll be interesting to see if the dynamic from debate number 2 carries over to debate number 3, or if people turn their guns to Elizabeth Warren a little bit, since she's emerging as at least a contender for being a front runner. Maybe not in national polls, but the national polls don't really matter. It's the polls at Iowa and New Hampshire what matter, because you emerge from those 2 states as a winner, all of a sudden you have a lot of momentum going into the other states. So people might say, well, maybe we should focus our attention on Warren rather than Biden, and we'll save Trump for the general. Yeah,
that's a good strategy. We'll see how that plays out. Let's change gears. Let's talk about this UAW strike against GM. Today is day 30. Hard to understand why it's dragging on so long. I know you have some thoughts about that. Today, I guess there's been some new developments that UAW has invited sort of the presidents of their other unions across the country to come to Detroit on Thursday. And some would say, well, that means there's a tentative agreement out there, and have them look at that. What are your thoughts on that?
This whole strike is so unusual in that you don't see long work stoppages in the modern economy like you did in the 1950s and the 1960s. So it's kind of like standing outside the Vatican waiting for a new pope, reading every little sign, every little event, trying to read a lot into it to predict the future. And one thing I've kind of learned during this strike is that it's really hard to predict what's going to happen next. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, when things moved out of the bargaining committees to the main committee, people said, well, a tentative agreement was on the way. Then things took a big step back. Now the regional UAW presidents are coming to Detroit. Does that mean there's a tentative agreement? Maybe, but maybe not, because usually a tentative agreement's announced first, then they bring these guys to Detroit. So maybe a tentative agreement's on the way, could be something else. I've heard speculation that it could be that they're trying to work a strategy up about what to do next to try to get General Motors to agree to a new contract, maybe shifting the focus of the bargaining from General Motors to Ford and agreeing to a deal with Ford first, and then forcing General Motors to use the Ford contract as a pattern. That hasn't happened yet, but the thinking being, well, General Motors might not like losing the ability to set the agenda, which might give the union leverage to negotiate a contract with GM. Or it could just be something completely different. It's just so hard to know.
Right, and economically, from a cost standpoint, it's costing Michigan an income tax revenue, I think something like $4 million a week. So it's hurting the state coffers as well. The other issue here with that is that I've heard it's sort of over healthcare costs, whether or not they're going to assume much more of the healthcare costs. It could be they have too many temporary workers, and they want more of these temporary workers to be full-time workers. And thirdly is just sort of shipping more products abroad, right?
Yeah, and also the idled plants are important. GM idled plants in Hamtramck, Lordstown. There's a transmission plant in Warren that got idled, one outside Baltimore. And people kind of view that as General Motors taking advantage of a technicality in the last contract, where the last contract said you're not allowed to shut down plants. And General Motors said, we're not going to shut these plants down, we're going to unallocate them. We're just not going to give them cars to build. So we're not going to shut them down, we're just not going to give them cars to build. And that's kind of a distinction without much of a difference. The UAW felt really burned by that, and they want a plan to keep those plants open.
Sure.
And it's hard to kind of square that circle. If the company wants to shut them down, the union wants to keep them open, to come up with a plan to kind of meet in the middle.
Okay, I'm gonna switch gears again. One more issue. You and I thought about, we talk about it in advance. The NBA feud with China over this Twitter comment. The general manager of the Houston Rockets in effect said he supports freedom, and those protesting in Hong Kong created a firestorm. The NBA overall sort of has taken a look away a little bit. They don't want to make this a big firestorm. LeBron James came out and said the guy didn't know what he was talking about. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it just shows the NBA is full of hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And that the NBA won't hesitate to virtue signal by pulling the All-Star game out of North Carolina over the bathroom bill, which will have required you to use a bathroom that's consistent with your gender assigned at birth. They won't hesitate to criticize the president on Twitter. Steve Kerr, the coach of the Golden State Warriors, won't hesitate to grandstand by not going to the White House after winning the championship. Yeah, it's easy to take shots at the president, but here you have an opportunity to take a stand in favor of democracy against arguably what's one of the world's most bloodthirsty regime, given what happened after the communist revolution in China. And the NBA is not only silent, but they take the side of the communist Chinese rather than the pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. It really is disgusting. But it
really
just
is.
shows that the NBA doesn't care about social issues. They don't care about democracy.
Right.
They just care about profit maximization, just like any other corporation out there.
They're getting $4 billion a year from China by playing in China. I mean, it's a huge audience, and LeBron, I think, just signed a 4-year, $150 million contract, so we know where his allegiance lies. So, good perspective. Nice having you in. Health was a good experience for you. So,
Yeah, I enjoyed being here. I look
Good.
forward to being here again.
you can count on it. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Up next, there's a lot happening to save lives from the opioid crisis, but it continues to be a major public health problem. More on that just ahead, but first, we would like to hear from you to help drive the conversation here on the follow-up. Good one. Join our conversation by visiting our website at deltabroadcasting.org/thefollowup, or hit me up on social media via Facebook and Twitter. Go to facebook.com/QTVFollowup, and on Twitter at QTVFollowup. And that's not all. Drop us an email at thefollowup@delta.edu, or you can record a comment or question on our follow-up hotline for next week's show. That's 1-877-430-8989. So join the conversation at The Follow-Up. We really want to hear from you. Welcome back to The Follow-Up. In 2017, drug overdoses in the U.S. killed more people than the Vietnam War. And in 2018, those numbers only went up. In Michigan last year, we lost nearly 3,000 people. Nearly half of those deaths can be attributed to opioids. So what's being done to attack the problem locally? Lori Ziolkowski is with us. She is with the Families Against Narcotics. And you've been on the show before, and we're glad to have you back because it's an important issue. This continues to be a major public health problem, and for some reason I feel like we're not making a dent in those kind of numbers, but I know there's a lot going on behind the scenes with your group. So I know, let's start with Family Against Narcotics. You had a forum here at Delta last Thursday. How did that go? What kind of things did you talk about? Did you get much participation?
This was particularly a great forum because Judge Linda Davis, who's one of the original founders of Families Against Narcotics down in Macomb County, was our speaker. And she came up specifically to help us celebrate our 2nd year anniversary in our Great Lakes Bay Region chapter. And she talked about, as a judge and as a prosecutor, how it was her job to put people who were using drugs in prison and in jail, and that she thought she was doing a good job until she had a family member who started struggling with addiction, and she learned that it's not bad people, it's good people with a bad disease. And so she changed her mindset. And they had a rash of overdoses in that particular area, and the community came together and said, we need to do something to stop this. And so we started a chapter here so we can do the same thing and use that as the model.
And you found a lot of, I assume, support from others, like the judge and like your family that went through it. Is it largely folks like you that have had a family issue?
Usually, and I
Yeah.
think that's kind of true.
Yeah.
You know, if you have someone who struggles with autism, that's on your radar and
Sure.
you work to prevent that. I'm a breast cancer survivor as well. That was not on my radar until it was in my house.
Right.
So I think unless it really is impacting you in your work life or in your personal life, you probably don't put your time and energy to those causes, right? We kind of pick what affects us, and this affected me and my family with my daughter's addiction. I'm happy to say our daughter now, Amanda, she's 3.5 years in recovery from a 4-year IV heroin battle, but I've met so many other parents who've lost their children, and I've met so many children who've lost their parents, people lose friends, and this is a fixable thing. This epidemic didn't exist 15 years ago,
Right.
and it doesn't have to continue going forward, so we can change things, and things are happening. It's just excruciatingly slow. I always say we have to do more, and we have to do it faster.
Right, and speaking of that, I'm going to get into sort of the litany of things that Family Against Narcotics have been doing in 2 years. It's amazing what you're doing, but I want to talk about this sort of on a national issue. A federal judge recently came down hard on some pharmaceutical companies, major monetary stuff there, with the effect of sort of getting it at the source, right?
Yep.
Do you think that's been effective? And some have said this is like the tobacco lawsuits from 20 years ago. Do you think that's the case?
Initially, when I started this work, I always said, you know what, that's not my battle to fight, and I'm not going to have an opinion of it. But as we started to see emails come out and see evidence of what was known and not known, because I said, I don't know if they knew or they didn't. I think it's pretty clear now that they knew. They knew what was happening and yet continued to sell. And that bothers me a lot. So I do think it's going to be like the tobacco industry, but we've got a lot of repair to do.
Absolutely.
And does money help? Yeah, it absolutely does help, but it needs to go to the right places. It can't go to, you know, millions of dollars to a university for research. That's great, and I'm a professor.
Right.
It has to get beds and treatment. When we call, we need to have people get beds and treatment. It needs family support. It needs, for prevention, those dollars need to go to the right places.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about sort of the litany of things that the organization that you're affiliated with is doing. Let's start with Hope, Not Handcuffs. How long has that been in place, and what's the essence of what that's doing, and has it been effective?
Hope Not Handcuffs was started again down in Macomb County with 5 different counties down there, and the premise is that if you're struggling with addiction, that you walk into a local police department and ask for help. And that might seem very contradictory on why would somebody do that, because for our daughter, the drug dealer was our enemy, her addiction was our enemy, and the police were. And it changes the narrative. Police are there to help us, to help preserve property and life. And so you walk into a police department and ask for help. In the counties that are participating in Michigan, we've helped over 3,300 people in 2 years. In our local counties, Bay City, Saginaw, Midland, we've helped over 100 people in our first year. So it is working, and they do call, and they do show up, and they ask for help, and we're able to assist with that.
Do you think this area, the Great Lakes Bay chapter of Family Against Narcotics, do you think you're ahead of the curve, or there's other sort of regions around the state that are kind of doing the same things you are, or do you think you're ahead of things here?
Well, I think, of course, where it first started down in Macomb County, that's where all the kind of the action is, and
Sure.
a lot of new initiatives. But I will tell you, we're the first ones for Families Against Narcotics who created a hidden in plain sight trailer.
Okay.
So it's kind of nice to be having that kind of a new thing. But definitely in larger communities like that, and where it first started, they're a little bit further ahead in terms of having peer recovery coaches and family recovery coaches. We'll be getting those here as well. So we are mirroring some of their initiatives. But in terms of other places around the state other than that, we are definitely further ahead.
Okay, you brought up the Hidden in Plain Sight trailer.
Yeah.
It's a good opportunity to talk about that.
So this is a grant that we received through Mid-State Health Network for $20,000 to create a mobile unit. We take it to different events. We've had it at 17 events so far since the launch this summer. And it looks like a typical teenager's bedroom inside, and it has some obvious and not so obvious signs of drug use. And the reason we wanted to do that is we wanted parents to come in and look at this stuff, things that I missed as a parent, little cotton balls that I thought were from makeup from a Q-tip or for filtering heroin. A strange obsession with tinfoil for art projects. There were no art projects. Why are all the spoons missing? Things that if you didn't know the things to put together, it wouldn't make sense to you. And so we teach parents on, these could be some red flags. What do vaping devices look like? Parents might not know. They look like a USB or they look like lip gloss. And the companies get more and more stealthy on how they disguise those things. And it's mostly so parents don't find them.
So what reaction do you get from people when they go through it?
It's interesting because
Yeah.
we've had community members go through, we've had law enforcement people, and we have stash products in there that we've either purchased locally or online, And even some of those stash products, when the police are going through, it's a cat and mouse game. Some of those they're not even familiar with. You know, hairbrushes that have fake ends, fake cans of Diet Cola. So it's surprising how difficult it is to find the stuff in a room. It really is.
So if there's a community out there or a school district that would like to use this, how would they go about doing
So
it?
they can just contact Families Against Narcotics, Great Lakes Bay Region. The best way is we have a Facebook page, and they can message us. And if you can put our link up there, that would be fantastic.
We will show you that.
Yeah, and so we're getting a little bit to the weather now where we might not be able to have it out much longer depending upon when the snow flies. But we go and speak at parent-teacher conferences. We take it to community clubs like Rotaries and Noon Optimists, those types of things. So we want to get it out there. We want people to see it.
Okay, let's talk about Narcan. It's
Yes.
critical to saving lives. You got to have it for the overdoses. Do we need to get more of it out there?
Absolutely.
How do people get access to it? How do they get trained? It even seems the police don't have enough of it, and they need it.
That was an issue early
Okay.
on. I'm not hearing that as much anymore.
Okay.
So if the first responders, if police departments or fire departments need it, that floodgate kind of opened up through Lansing that we can get as much Narcan as we need. We do free training and distribution after every fan forum meeting. We're also training in the community. We trained all of the Dow events employees, and now they have 3 different locations with Narcan in their building. We're going to be training Zender Splash Village employees coming up very soon, because where you have large crowds of people that gather, chances are fairly high in the epidemic that we're in that somebody might overdose. The Surgeon General said this is the #1 way that we can stop the dying. So when you're triaging this, you have to stop the dying first, focus on getting people who are sick already treatment, and then the biggest part is prevention. If we don't get anybody to fall into addiction, we're not going to have as much of a problem.
You know, Family Against Narcotics, you do a great job from a grassroots standpoint, pulling people together that have been affected by it, doing all these things. Where are you in terms of what's happening at a federal level? What's happening at a state level? I know a year ago, President Trump talked about a drug czar and an opioid on a national level. I know Governor Whitmer this year came out with an opioid task force. It all sounds good. But the reality is, are you discouraged that that's really maybe not going anywhere?
Sometimes with big organizations, it moves very, very slowly. I will tell you that I've had Congressman Molinar reach out and sat on a panel discussion. Congressman Kildee sat on a panel discussion. They want to know how to help, but they're a little bit far removed from that. I will tell you that the money coming into Michigan this year, we're getting bigger grants and more grants earmarked for things that really matter. So we are starting to see those things. Judge Davis was on Governor Snyder's task force. She was the head of it. She's on this task force as well. But as you know, with politics, things move very slowly, and people are dying. And so, like I always say, we need to do more and we need to do it faster. I would like to see more changes. I'd like to see more prevention in the schools mandated, that not only the kids get it, but the parents did it. We were clueless that there was a prescription drug epidemic when my daughter was in high school, clueless. As I can tell you, pretty much every other parent of a high schooler. We need to educate parents.
And another issue, can your organization and you personally be a good resource to guide and direct folks into sort of certain rehab centers? Because I know they're not one size fits all. There's some substance abuse rehab centers that are doing a great job, but there's others that maybe are not. So how do you filter through that, right?
Well, we don't certify any of them, and so most of our clients come to us with Medicaid, or they are uninsured. That's the majority of the people through the Hope Not Handcuffs program. Our new program, Hope and Healing, that we're partnering with some local hospitals, most of those clients are coming through with private insurance. Every facility takes different things. There's only 3 in the state of Michigan that take Medicare. It's very difficult to place someone in Medicare. And so we try to customize what works best for you. Do you want to stay local? Do you want to go further away? Do you want to use medication-assisted therapy? Because not every facility offers it, or do you not? Do you want to have a smoking facility or not? Does it need to be 1 floor because you have some disabilities? So we ask the clients enough questions where then we can narrow down the list on these would be the best fit. We never pick for them, then they get to choose.
Okay. Let's talk about the Angel Network, right?
Yeah.
Your angels, talk about that and how you get involved in that.
So we've got about 8 angel trainings coming up. It's a 2-hour training, and we teach you how to empathetically meet a person at either the hospital or the police department, or help them online just from your phone to guide them into treatment. So we show you which forms you have to complete. We show you how to call the facilities and get people into treatment. So far, we've got 177 trained angels, and we've got about 244 more on the list. So if they're interested in that training, you get on our hopenothandcuffs.org, and you can click on Become an Angel, and it'll show you exactly what you do. You apply, and then you pick which training you want to go to. So we're looking for people to help. It's the only way that this program works. It's 100% volunteer.
Good. Well, I want you to look at the Facebook sites, the websites. Bob, pull those up so that the viewers that are watching right now, you've got the Families Against Narcotics.org.
Yep.
That's the one, and you've got the Hope Not Handcuffs Facebook page. There's that. That's the best way to get a hold of you,
Yep,
right?
that's the best way. Yep.
And I want to ask you about, you're a nonprofit, right?
Correct, yeah.
And so where do you get the funding? Have you gone out with some grants, some foundations? Have you had any success doing that?
Yep.
How else do you raise money here?
Our only grant that we received was specifically earmarked for the Hidden in Plain Sight trailer, so that
Okay.
was the only kind of state-funded
Okay.
grant that we received. Everything else is from the community. So we've received donations from churches, from organizations. The toughest money to take is when parents lose a child and they donate any of those funds given to our organization, and of course we take them because it does make a difference, but that's tough. But we have had organizations reach out to us and write us checks.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
that's the only way that we survive.
Right.
We literally had less than $900 in the bank, and I just was awarded another check from a group of very generous donors. That's going to help continue our volunteerism.
And that kind of information can be on the website there, right?
The best place to check with that is on our Facebook page.
Okay, and
Yep.
one last thing, you're getting into sort of grief support as well?
Yeah, so we have a number of regular attendees, board members and advisory board members who tragically have lost their children. And so they decided to take that pain and really step up and help other people. So now after every fan forum, which is the second Thursday of the month here at Delta College, they stay after and they discuss grief. We'll probably formalize it a little bit more as it gets going, but sometimes people feel so alone when they're in the middle of addiction, and families feel so alone after that tragic loss.
Well, you guys are doing a great job, and we'll probably have you on again, and we hope we can put a dent in this thing between now and the next time I
Yeah,
have
we
you
want to see
on.
the numbers go down.
It's just very disturbing, but you're
Yeah.
providing a lot of good information. It's great you're doing so much to help in our community. Thanks, Lori.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And that's our show for tonight, but be sure to join us again next Tuesday night at 8 for the follow-up. In the meantime, hit me up on social media or dial into our follow-up hotline to voice your opinions and suggest future show topics. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Have a great night.